Hello, just first of all, checking that everyone can hear me. Just
Yeah.
confirm. All good, thank you. Sorry, this is like the typical thing of like when you present by Zoom, the fact you need to check all the tech stuff. Thank you everyone for being there to listen. And I'm sorry, I cannot be there in person on the other side of the world, trying to present this very early. So yes, I'm Adriana, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Philosophical Psychology in the University of Amber, although I'm not right now in Scotland. And what I'm going to be presenting today is going to be giving like a very quick overview of my past research, specifically everything I did during my PhD on the objectless sleep experiences. So I'm afraid that in terms of time, I'm not going to be able to go in depth into some of the things I'm going to be presenting, but I'm going to be giving you pointers to some of the papers I have published and that are due to be published as well. So you can check them out later. And also, of course, feel free to ask questions at the end of the presentation or reach me out via email if you want me to send them by email as well. Okay. So just situating the topic. So normally when we think about consciousness during sleep, we tend to think about mental imaging. We tend to think about experiences like dreaming. So paradigmatic case of consciousness during sleep may be an experience that simulates waking reality, like kind of like similar experience I'm having right now here while I'm awake, but during sleep. But what we know from either from our own experience or from sleep research is that sleep experiences or consciousness during sleep involves like a wider range of experiences. So we may include here in this category hypnagogic or hypnopompic states. So these are simple and brief hallucinations that we may have as we are falling asleep or also waking up. And we may have like other sort of experiences that they don't involve imagistic content at all. So they are more, have to do more with linguistic content, like sleep thinking. And we may also have like just sensations in our bodies that we can report. But my research and what I'm going to be focusing today has been on a subset of sleep experiences that are kind of like we'll classify here under the umbrella term of objectless or contentless episodes. And I'm going to explain you a bit more what these are about. So objectless awareness during sleep is a subset of experiences that have been mainly reported in Indian philosophical traditions. So it's a group of experiences that we don't know that much about them in Western philosophy or even in the sleep research in the Western world. But they have been widely reported in certain Indian philosophical traditions, such as the Advaita Vedānta. So according to authors in this school, we have they talk about a specific state of awareness while we are asleep, which they say is completely different from the sort of awareness that we have during waking, but also the sort of awareness that we have during dreaming. Okay. So according to them, this state that's called sushupti involves a state of non-dual awareness. So non-dual awareness in terms of like they lacks the self-other structure of ordinary consciousness. So there is no an I or a person who is aware of something. There is no person at all. There's just awareness. So it lacks this object directness that we usually experience in consciousness. So there's no awareness of an object. It's just awareness. What's important here is that according to these traditions, the only thing that remains during this state is what they call the self-awareness aspect of consciousness. So that which refers to itself. Okay. So it kind of like comes from an idea that they have in these traditions that every act of consciousness, it always involves an element that refers to itself. Okay, so we have this element that refers to itself, so kind of like the qualitative character or subjective character of conscious experience, and then we have this object directness aspect of consciousness. So this object directness aspect of consciousness is what is lacking here. So the only thing that remains is the subjective one. Sorry, I had to click. But then we also see this in other traditions, including Tibetan Buddhism, specifically in the Dzogchen tradition. So in this one, we find also mentions to what has been called as a state of clear light sleep, or also witnessing sleep, if we read some of the translations of these traditional texts. And the same idea prevails. So the idea here being that there is a conscious state during a sleep in which I become aware of what they regard as the self-luminous aspect of consciousness. So again, this self-awareness aspect of consciousness, what's given in the phenomenal character of the experience, that's all what there is. For these traditions, actually, this act of realization of this self-awareness aspect of consciousness is regarded as a moment in which I realize about the nature or essence of consciousness. Okay, here not going into much detail about the metaphysical backgrounds that these traditions have, but just for you to have an idea of what this will be referred for them as a clear light sleep. It's an episode in which I realize what consciousness is in a way. Kind of like more in terms of like more contemporary texts, if we look into Tibetan Buddhism, so we find practices such as yoga nidra, which are meditative practices that are aided at reaching this state of clarity or luminosity. So the idea here is that you, as a meditator, you practice to become aware through all the process of sleep. So kind of like maintaining your awareness as you're falling asleep, but also as you go from sleep to dreaming. And then reaching a state in which you can become aware of dreaming, as in the case of lucid dreaming, but also what follows afterwards, which I will present more details later. But the idea here is, yes, this is that you maintain all awareness as you're like through all the state of sleep. So more recently, this state of objectless awareness, such as the clear light sleep or witnessing sleep, has kind of like received a lot of attention in analytic philosophy of mind, and has become kind of like a popular topic especially I will say in the last 7 years since I started my research on this. And the thing is because the idea is being that this experience has been targeted as a kind of like as an episode in order to study more what is the nature of consciousness. Okay, so if it's true, if it's the case that as these traditions are describing that what we have here is a state that lacks all this object directness of ordinary consciousness. It's a state that lacks intentional content. It's a state in which there is only phenomenality. So in a way, we have like the perfect state in order to study what it is to be conscious. So we have a state in order to kind of like examine what are the necessary sufficient conditions for us to be conscious. But the thing is that if we look into the literature from these traditions, is that descriptions of the witnessing sleep, of the clear light sleep, or sushupti are very, very heterogeneous, so are very diverse. And most of the time, they either rely on second-hand descriptions, anecdotal descriptions of this experience. So most of the time, it's very difficult to see whether authors in these traditions are talking about different states, talking about a specific one. There's like a range of experiences. So when we are trying to pick up exactly what we mean by objectless awareness, is quite difficult. Okay. So then what I did for my research was to try to apply a bottom-up approach to a study of objectless sleep awareness. So instead of like taking of like what we usually do in analytic philosophy of mind, is to take a more of like a priori approach to kind of like examine what it means for us, for one, to have like a state of objectless sleep awareness, was to kind of like take an approach from the bottom up, so from examining the experience itself. Okay, so let's go to the outside world and let's see what people means, what they have an experience that appears to them as being objectless. Okay, and then from them examining which will be the phenomenological features, if any, of that experience. Okay, it's here just to make a note that, of course, like even if we are trying to attempt to apply a bottom-up approach to the study of these experiences, in which it's not kind of like doesn't draw from our own theoretical beliefs about what this experience is, it's still colored by those, isn't it? So like even though we are trying to step aside to what we believe or what we think this experience should be about and just examine the experience itself, it still will be colored by our own assumptions, belief about what consciousness is or what it means to be in a state of object awareness. Okay. But we're just trying to step aside as much as we can from it. And what I did here, or like what my research has been about, has been combining first methods, quantitative methods, and also conceptual analysis, just more typical from analytical philosophy. So for the rest of the presentation, I'm just keeping an eye on the time. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of two studies that I did, trying to examine the phenomenology of objectless sleep experiences. And then if I can, I will give you a brief follow-up on like how we can connect all that to build a more theoretical approach. Okay, so the first study that I conducted was not so much phenomenological, so it was a more online survey with the aim of like finding participants for a second study, which it did involve phenomenological interviews. And this survey already, in the development of it, already faced the problem, as I was commenting to you before, so that it's quite difficult to ask people directly about whether you have had this state of objectless sleep awareness, especially because the term itself, objectless sleep awareness, or witnessing sleep or clear light sleep, is a very ill-defined concept, isn't it? And also because people, they may have had this experience, but they don't conceptualize it in this way. They may have like a different notion, or they have a different way to describe it. So what I did here was to design this offline, this survey in which I included like a variety of questions about different sort of experiences that have been reported in the literature. So they seem to be about objectless awareness, kind of like including a state of a sleep onset awareness, lucid dreaming awareness, transition from lucid dreaming to waking. And then also I did include associated experiences that have also been mentioned in the literature as potentially related to objectless awareness, such as sleep onset transition, in which I am aware that I'm falling asleep, but it lacks any sort of content, and also the experience of white dreaming. So white dreaming is the experience of you waking up and kind of like becoming aware that you did have some dream, or you were conscious as you were sleeping, but you don't remember the content of such an experience. So some authors have proposed that maybe that a subset of white dreaming may be pointing at these objectless sleep experiences. So the idea here is that I don't remember anything as I wake up, or I only remember that I was conscious, but I don't remember the content of that experience, because the experience itself lacks any sort of content whatsoever. Okay. So then I also include questions on white dreaming to see if any of the participants may be describing an experience that it seemed like a case of objectless sleep. So in total, I recruited 573 responses that will be used, and I will present very briefly some of the main results. So in terms of like putative cases of objectless sleep awareness, as they have been described in the literature, identified a state of void or nothingness or darkness that was common across the open-ended answers to the survey. But as you can see here, it was only 5% of participants that kind of like reported experiences like that. So they were quite rare. And I grouped them in like two kind of like subset of the two different categories. So one of them were descriptions that alluded to the dissolution of the lucid dream. So participants had a lucid dream that then dissolved, and then they were talking about the sort of awareness that followed that state. And they were talking about things like the dream faded, fell away, dissolved, collapsed into complete void. There was like a nothing, darkness, or it folded into itself. But still, even though that state involved like a dissolution of the dream, reports still included some elements, such as the space equality, gray, darkness, some movements that there were in that experience. And then there were other reports as well, in which there was no dissolution of the dream itself. There was just an awareness in which one was conscious while asleep, and that state didn't involve any sort of visuals or images. It was an empty state. But as the same case as before, there was still a feeling of like sinking into this nothingness, hovering into space. And there was just a sense of being there, basic awareness of being alive. Then, as I was saying before, I also kind of like surprisingly found like a lot of reports on this experience of white dreaming. And what I did here was to kind of like don't take into account the ones that they make kind of like explicit allusion to the fact that as they woke up, they did remember the dream and then they forgot about it, or they remember only some of the elements of the dream experience. But instead, I would just focus on reports in which there was just a feeling that one remembered the dream, one was aware that they were conscious while they were sleeping, but there was no content at all. And most of the reports kind of like alluded to this an experience that seemed to be like a tip of the tongue feeling. So the feeling of like, I remembered your name, but now I don't remember what your name is about. Or just an emotional state, like the example here. So I know I dreamt something because I felt it, but I don't know what it was other than it was unpleasant and left me with an uncomfortable feeling. So there are many reports of this sort of like just waking up and remember a feeling that one thinks that was related to their experience during sleep, but nothing else. Just moving quickly to the next one. So in the next study, as I was saying, we went into more detail. So we recruited some of the participants that from the survey that they described states that seem to be potential cases of objectless sleep awareness. And we conducted phenomenological interviews, which actually we did this together with Emma, who was just presenting right now. And won't go into more detail about the microphenomenological method because she has already explained it. So we had a total of 18 participants with 21 interviews. And then we asked them to report an experience they have within the last month in which they had they regarded as an experience of the lack content as they were asleep. So I think before, so taking all the reports that we have from the interviews, kind of like we conducted a qualitative analysis of them. And then what we identified was like a common phase across some of those participants, which were regarded as a nothingness phase. So it was a phase that was characterized by a lack of bodily awareness, so what we could say was a bodiless experience. Yet was still a minimal sense of self. So there was people were still reporting a sense in which that experience was an experience that they had, even though it may have lacked a body. Like visuals, yet it was still some what we call non-model sensations, and it was an awareness of the state as it. And I'm going to give you kind of like 3 examples of some of these categories that came up across all the reports. Okay? But again, all this is very briefly. I refer for you to check out the published article, so you can see like a full and full detail, all the different categories that we extracted from the interviews as well, like a better discussion of. So in terms of a minimal sense of self, we described that as a lack of embodiment, yet self-identification with experience. So one of the participants say, one of kind of like more paradigmatic examples here was one of the participants who said to lack a sense of self altogether, yet there's still a sensation that there was something that was happening to them. So there was not even a sort of sense of being a person, and there was just this tapping happening, but I was definitely conscious. But definitely there was some consciousness there. There was some sense that this tapping was happening, but it was just their point. So for them, this experience was completely selfless, although they regarded that as something that was happening to them. It was in this case this tapping that was happening in their chest. And some of the representative examples was the fact that this experience lacked sensory perception. Although there was a sense in which they were still having some feelings, so they felt this emptiness or this void in which they were. So for instance, once the senses disappeared, I had nothing, and I was just floating in the nothingness, and it just feels like total nothingness, just like emptiness. So because the only sensation that you have, if you could even call this sensation, will be a sensation of nothing. And all that in the paper, we go into much detail about how these participants may have described the experience of feeling the nothingness or feeling that there was a void in this state. And then lastly, some of the common features across the participants was the fact that they were aware as this experience was unfolding. So there was some sort of awareness about one's awareness. So I'm aware not in the traditional sense. The traditional sense will have to involve something you can relate to. It's a time of thought. You're definitely crossing into esoteric thought here. So there is an awareness, but there's nothing to be aware of. And just to show you kind of like an example as well of like what we did with this interview. So other than the different phenomenal categories that we extracted from the reports, we also were able to identify how this experience unfolded over time. Okay, so here in the center, we have this nothingness phase that was identified across participants. But then the way in which each participant was getting into this nothing phase and getting out of it was quite different. So we have kind of like 3 different diachronic structures. So some participants were talking about this dream dissolution, so like becoming aware that they were dreaming. Then the dream was disappearing either actively or passively. In other cases, they were just an awareness of a sleep onset that then led into this nothingness phase. And then in some other cases, they didn't recall at all what happened. They were just like became aware at some point during the night of being in this state of void or nothingness, but there was no experience that preceded it. And the same thing happened afterwards. No? So in some cases, this nothingness phase led to participants to wake up, whereas in other cases, they unfolded into a different sort of experience. So yeah, and just to wrap up, and then in terms of time, I can see I cannot go into the last bit that I have prepared, but that's okay. So kind of like from these 2 studies, what I kind of like concluded was that, well, in a way, if we take these experiences or these reports at prima facie, it seems that objectless sleep experiences such, they don't necessarily lack content altogether. So in a way, we can conceptualize a construct like category of experiences that it may appear to one as they are objectless, so it's a state of nothingness or void. But then when we examine them in more detail, we see that they may indeed involve some sort of minimal content. So there may be this perception of like simple visuals, so such as the experience of darkness, experience of like tiny movements, as well as some bodily sensations, such as floating movement, but also these more non-model sensations of like experiencing the void or experiencing the nothing. So then we can then talk a bit more about, like my proposal was that we should be talking about the spectrum of objectless sleep experiences. Some of them may be closer to this prototypical clear light sleep or witnessing a sleep that we find in Indian philosophical traditions, such as like this experience was completely selfless or objectless. Still, they still involved this element in which one was aware of the experience as an experience that was one's experience. And then some other maybe closer to what we regard as instances of minimal dreams. So minimal dreams being an experience that it's a dream experience, but it's not a full-fledged dream experience. So it's not a simulation of myself in a dream world, but it's just like an experience of myself being situated in this void or being aware of some minimal content. So yeah, here again, just repeating that then I kind of like formulated this construct of objectless sleep experiences that kind of like would be a bit different from this idea of like that they objectless sleep experiences as being an experiences that lack intentional content altogether, but they still have some sort of meaning. And then I will just that. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I'm gonna give you the microphone if you want to ask the question, but you also have to go close the green ball thing. That's the Zoom question ball. Shall I carry them on?
They're connected, so you find one close to you in these ones.
Hi, could you go back to the circular plot with this transition?
Yeah.
So I'm also interested in transitions between consciousness states. And in your talk, you seem to propose that there is like experience of nothingness, and it's like kind of another state of consciousness within the realm of sleep. And it's very interesting for me, but I wonder how would you defend that it really exists and it's not something else? What I mean is you can have a very strange experience that you cannot really ongoingly integrate. And when then the experience is structured, you can, for example, forget that you had some experience, you were losing access to it, and you confabulate that maybe, first case, you're losing access to something which you cannot integrate, and the other is you're just getting more awake and awake, and you go from non-consciousness space to actually being conscious, and nothingness is just the projection of this transition. So basically, there are cases that you confabulate your past experiences. So just by asking participants, you can never know which phase they were really actually in. So I wonder whether you can, in the future, provide more data on what they actually experienced and how this transition works. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, as you're mentioning here, no, there's no way in which, especially, well, like 2 points here, no. So these experiences were reported afterwards, after they occurred. They were not reported in the sleep lab, so it was no way for us to verify whether these people were asleep or in which sleep stage they were. But yeah, in the case here, as you say, no, like it seems that in a way what I can describe retrospectively will be the fact that I am going into this experience of nothingness, if it's indeed experience which lack content altogether, and the moment in which I'm going out this experience. No? What happened during the experience itself, if it was an actual experience of nothingness, there was nothing to report. But here, what I have been doing with another paper that I have has been to relate this to the state of mind blanking, which will be something quite similar in the case of wakefulness, isn't it? So like I have like an experience in which I remember from the past, there was a moment in which there was like a gap on conscious experience, or a gap in which there was no content whatsoever. And the only thing I can report to you will be the moments that preceded that experience or followed that experience. No? But there's no way for us to kind of like pinpoint exactly in which moment, or like what I'm describing to you exactly, no? Whether it's the transition in, or the moment in between, or at what time during this nothingness phase or mind blanking in terms of wakefulness that was occurring. But yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. You may have to hold the pause as well.
Thank you. Thanks for the talk. This is more of a comment than a question, I guess, but maybe I can ask a question too. So what you do is very interesting, and it sounds similar to a project that has been going on in Madison, Wisconsin. We just uploaded a paper to bioRxiv called The Neural Correlates of Pure Presence. The first author is Melanie Bolli and Giulio Tononi. Yep. I don't know if you are aware of this or if you quoted it in this presentation, maybe I missed it, but it seems very, very much in line with what you've been doing. And the interesting thing that I want to bring up is exactly that even when people say that their experience is basically of nothingness, then if probed a little deeper, they do report something like, well, there was some sort of like vast expanse, clear light, some feeling of expansion, some undefined visual maybe experiences still there. And this, of course, and in this case, it was another type of meditation, Vajrayana Buddhism connected to Diamond Way meditation, but it seems similar. So yeah, I was just wondering if you're aware of these studies and if you find some overlaps, and also what is the possible connection with states induced by psychedelics instead of meditation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So yeah, I was not aware about this latest paper. I know about Melanie's research with different sorts of meditative practices that you were mentioning. Yeah, so that's a great point, and I think that's one of the things I was trying to kind of like bring out with my research, you know, that in some cases, or most of the cases that appear as objectless sleep awareness or objectless awareness in general, when you go into more detail with these sort of phenomenological interviews, you kind of like unveil different aspects that make those experiences to be less objectless, no? So then here we will have the more philosophical discussion to what extent those will still be cases of objectless awareness. And then in case of psychedelics, yeah, I didn't relate in my research, mostly because there's kind of like a lot of literature on those experiences, so I was trying to stay away from it. But yeah, in terms of like especially experiences such as like drug-induced ego dissolution experiences, so we have a lot of commonalities here. No? So the same idea being of like that you have an experience in which you lose yourself. There's no sense of self whatsoever, and then leads to sort of kind of like contentless awareness. But yeah, that's kind of like a bit what I have been trying to do in the latest paper, which I was not able to go over it in the presentation. I was connecting more these states to other experiences during wakefulness, such as sensory deprivation, tongues, or experiences of deep meditation. And then, yeah, there you could also include cases of psychedelic experiences. So they seem to have a similar kind of a structure, no? Like it appears to you as they're objectless, but then when you go into more detail, there's still some elements that we may regard as contentful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that marks the end of the session, and thank you very much, Adriana. We're clapping
Thank you, guys.
here.